Epilogue of the Story of a Soul. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Anne Boulay. The Story of a Soul, the Autobiography of Saint Therese of Lisieux. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Epilogue. A Victim of Divine Love. Many pages of this story, said its writer, will never be read upon earth. It is necessary to repeat and emphasize her words. There are sufferings which are not to be disclosed here below. Our Lord has jealously reserved to Himself the right to reveal their merit and glory, in the clear vision where all veils shall be removed. My God, she cried on the day of her religious profession, give me martyrdom of soul or body, or rather give me both the one and the other. And our Lord who, as she herself avowed, fulfilled all her desires, granted this one also, and in more abundant measure than the rest. He caused the floods of infinite tenderness pent up in His divine heart to overflow into the soul of His little spouse. This was the martyrdom of love, so well described in her melodious song. But it was her own doctrine that said, to dedicate oneself as a victim of love is not to be dedicated to sweetness and consolations. It is to offer oneself to all that is painful and bitter, because love lives only by sacrifice. And the more we would surrender ourselves to love, the more we must surrender ourselves to suffering. Therefore, because she desired to attain the loftiest height of love, the Divine Master led her thither by the rugged path of sorrow, and it was only on its bleak summit that she died a victim of love. We have seen how great was her sacrifice in leaving her happy home and the Father who loved her so tenderly. It may be imagined that this sacrifice was softened, because at the Carmel she found again her two elder and dearly loved sisters. On the contrary, this afforded the young postulant many an occasion for repressing her strong natural affections. The rules of solitude and silence were strictly observed, and she only saw her sisters at recreation. Had she been less mortified, she might often have sat beside them, but by preference she sought out the company of those religious who were least agreeable to her, and no one could tell whether or not she bore a special affection towards her own sisters. Some time after her entrance, she was appointed as aide to Sister Agnes of Jesus, her dear Pauline. This was a fresh occasion for sacrifice. Thérèse knew that all unnecessary conversation was forbidden, and therefore she never allowed herself even the least word. "Oh, my little mother," she said later, "how I suffered! I could not open my heart to you, and I thought you no longer knew me." After 5 years of this heroic silence, Sister Agnes of Jesus was elected prioress. On the evening of the election, Thérèse might well have rejoiced that henceforth she could speak freely to her little mother, and, as of old, pour out her soul. But sacrifice had become her daily food. If she sought one favour more than another, it was that she might be looked on as the lowest and the least, and, among all the religious, not one saw less of the Mother Prioress. She desired to live the life of Carmel with all the perfection required by Saint Teresa, and, although a martyr to habitual dryness, her prayer was continuous. On one occasion a novice, entering her cell, was struck by the heavenly expression of her countenance. She was sewing industriously, and yet seemed lost in deep contemplation. "What are you thinking of?" the young sister asked. "I am meditating on the Our Father," Thérèse answered. "It is so sweet to call God our Father!" And tears glistened in her eyes. Another time she said, "I cannot well see what more I shall have in heaven than I have now. I shall see God, it is true, but, as to being with Him, I am that already even on earth." The flame of divine love consumed her, and this is what she herself relates. "A few days after the oblation of myself to God's merciful love, I was in the choir, beginning the Way of the Cross, when I felt myself suddenly wounded by a dart of fire so ardent that I thought I should die. I do not know how to explain this transport. There is no comparison to describe the intensity of that flame. It seemed as though an invisible force plunged me wholly into fire. But oh, what fire, what sweetness! When Mother Prioress asked her if this rapture was the first she had experienced, she answered simply, "Dear Mother, I have had several transports of love, and one in particular during my novitiate, when I remained for a whole week far removed from this world. It seemed as though a veil were thrown over all earthly things, but I was not then consumed by a real fire. I was able to bear those transports of love without expecting to see the ties that bound me to earth give way, whilst, on the day of which I now speak, 1 minute, 1 second more, and my soul must have been set free. Alas! I found myself again on earth, and dryness at once returned to my heart. True, the divine hand had withdrawn the fiery dart, but the wound was unto death. In that close union with God, Thérèse acquired a remarkable mastery over self. All sweet virtues flourished in the garden of her soul, but do not let us imagine that these wondrous flowers grew without effort on her part. In this world there is no fruitfulness without suffering, either physical pain, secret sorrow, or trials known sometimes only to God. When good thoughts and generous resolutions have sprung up in our souls through reading the lives of the Saints, we ought not to content ourselves, as in the case of profane books, with paying a certain tribute of admiration to the genius of their authors. We should rather consider the price which, doubtless, they have paid for that supernatural good they have produced. Dom Guéranger. And if today Thérèse transforms so many hearts, and the good she does on earth is beyond reckoning, we may well believe she bought it all at the price with which Jesus bought back our souls, by suffering and the cross. Not the least of these sufferings was the unceasing war she waged against herself, refusing every satisfaction to the demands of her naturally proud and impetuous nature. While still a child she had acquired the habit of never excusing herself or making a complaint. At the Carmel she strove to be the little servant of her sisters in religion, and in that same spirit of humility she endeavoured to obey all without distinction. One evening, during her illness, the community had assembled in the garden to sing a hymn before an altar of the Sacred Heart. Soeur Thérèse, who was already wasted by fever, joined them with difficulty, and, arriving quite exhausted, was obliged to sit down at once. When the hymn began, one of the sisters made her a sign to stand up. Without hesitation, the humble child rose, and, in spite of the fever and great oppression from which she was suffering, remained standing to the end. The infirmarian had advised her to take a little walk in the garden for 1/4 of an hour each day. This recommendation was for her a command. One afternoon a sister, noticing what an effort it cost her, said, "Soeur Thérèse, you would do much better to rest. Walking like this cannot do you any good. You only tire yourself." "That is true," she replied, "but, do you know what gives me strength? I offer each step for some missionary. I think that possibly, over there, far away, one of them is weary and tired in his apostolic labours, and to lessen his fatigue I offer mine to the good God." She gave her novices some beautiful examples of detachment. One year the relations of the sisters and the servants of the convent had sent bouquets of flowers for Mother Prioress's feast. Thérèse was arranging them most tastefully, when a lay sister said crossly, "It is easy to see that the large bouquets have been given by your friends. I suppose those sent by the poor will again be put in the background." A sweet smile was the only reply, and notwithstanding the unpleasing effect, she immediately put the flowers sent by the servants in the most conspicuous place. Struck with admiration, the lay sister went at once to the prioress to accuse herself of her unkindness, and to praise the patience and humility shown by Soeur Thérèse. After the death of Thérèse, that same sister, full of confidence, pressed her forehead against the feet of the saintly nun, once more asking forgiveness for her fault. At the same instant she felt herself cured of cerebral anemia, from which she had suffered for many years, and which had prevented her from applying herself either to reading or mental prayer. Far from avoiding humiliations, Soeur Thérèse sought them eagerly, and for that reason she offered herself as aid to a sister who, she well knew, was difficult to please, and her generous proposal was accepted. One day, when she had suffered much from this sister, a novice asked her why she looked so happy. Great was her surprise on receiving the reply, "It is because Sister N has just been saying disagreeable things to me. What pleasure she has given me! I wish I could meet her now, and give her a sweet smile." As she was still speaking, the sister in question knocked at the door, and the astonished novice could see for herself how the Saints forgive. Soeur Thérèse acknowledged later on, she soared so high above earthly things that humiliations did but make her stronger. To all these virtues she joined a wonderful courage. From her entrance into the Carmel, at the age of 15, she was allowed to follow all the practices of its austere rule, the fasts alone excepted. Sometimes her companions in the novitiate, seeing how pale she looked, tried